You're listening to the podcast for all of the news, notes, and breakdowns for your Ohio State Buckeyes. This is Sons of the Shoe with Nick Wilson and Spencer German.
Sons of the Shoe. We are back. We are ready to talk about Ohio State, Wisconsin, all this Michigan nonsense. You guys can follow the show on our Twitter handles, as you see there, at Nick Wilson Says, at Spencito. Please be sure we are a new podcast. Please follow, rate, and, of course, subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Spencer, how the hell you doing, buddy?
Pretty good, Nick. Can't complain, man. Just, still reeling. Not reeling. That's the wrong word. That's a completely wrong word. Still, feeling good about the win on Saturday, but certainly wrapped up in a lot of this Michigan cheating scandal and ready for another week of college football that awaits us on the weekend.
I know we got to preview the Wisconsin game, which feels anticlimactic, even though they are 5-2 and technically the leader in the Big Ten West right now. But you mentioned it, the Michigan stuff. And if we just set up the details of this Michigan scandal, this sign-stealing scandal, just setting up the details as of right now would be its own 1-hour podcast. But the highlights are here is that Michigan has this GA, Connor Stallions, who has been connected to and accused of sign stealing, including paying under his own name for multiple airline tickets to future Big Ten opponents and potential playoff opponents for Michigan over the last couple of years. They have proof of that. And they also have photographic evidence from stadium security of him in the building. So that's where we start. And again, just to reset for the sign stealing side of things.
Those damn AI facial recognition scanners, they get you every time.
How do we know that AI wasn't lying? You never know. I mean, AI could just be an Ohio State fan at this point. But there's an important distinction to make here as we start this conversation. Sign stealing in and of itself is a time-honored tradition in college football.
In all sports.
In all sports, that's right. Sometimes it wins you World Series. And in this case, what's at stake was whether this person did in-person scouting, which is illegal, and whether he used technology to help sign steal. And that seems to be what the NCAA is trying to prove. I did as best as I could to sum this up in a small amount of time, but I'm just curious, where do you lean with what you've seen so far out of the story?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, to your point, Nick, like it's a time-honored tradition across, I think, all sports, but in college football especially. I think my initial reaction was, I'm sure everybody's doing this. Not that excuses it necessarily, because I know that's always the thing people jump to. It's like, oh, well, it's not that big of a deal. Everybody's doing something like this in some capacity. It's like, yeah, that's probably true. But obviously, in the eyes of the NCAA, it's still breaking and violating a rule. So I can understand why they're going to try to do whatever it is that they can do with whatever amount of power they even still have left after NIL's now a thing to try to, I guess, enact some sort of punishment on Michigan here. But, yeah, I mean, it's to me, I'm less worried, Nick, about what this all means for like Michigan right now and vacating wins and what the punishment's going to be and the fact that they did this and just in general, because again, I think it is something that a lot of people are probably doing or a lot of teams are probably doing. I'm more so interested in what the aftermath of this is, because I've already been on the record saying, I think that Jim Harbaugh, he always drops the hints that he's ready to go on to the NFL. And I think this year with what the cheeseburger situation, when he bought a couple recruits cheeseburgers that got him suspended to start the season, and now this, I think this is all just kind of pointing to the writing being on the wall for Jim Harbaugh, where it's like he's just going to say, you know what, I'm done with the NCAA being up my ass about everything, and it's time for me to go back to the NFL and have success there.
I mean, Harbaugh does seem like a guy who constantly needs authority figure or villain to push back against. I think that's why San Francisco went poorly. I think that's why a lot of his stops as a head coach have not gone on as long as Michigan have. And here's the thing, like I don't know how you can prove that Jim Harbaugh had knowledge of this. And I think there's a big difference in the punishment between Harbaugh knowing and not knowing. You can still use the old dreaded lack of institutional control. But if you really wanted to make a case out of Jim Harbaugh, you have to prove that he knows. And honestly, I don't even know how significant this scandal, like is it going to be a game suspension? Like, people are talking about vacating wins. They're talking about end of times for Michigan. And we actually have a little audio to play that I think kind of falls in line with this. I'll be honest with you. I think the whole thing's ridiculous. I do think Connor Stallions is really bad at cheating. If everything that has come out, like, there's a Venmo payment to a coaching assistant the day before the Ohio State Georgia playoff game, and under the like reason for it just says GA. Like, that's just stupid. Like, this is like a bad villain in like a Die Hard movie of like, aren't you supposed to be more badass than this? Your name is Connor Stallions, for Christ's sake. Like, you sound like a horse of a man, and instead you look a bit like a jackass. Like, I'm a little disappointed in Connor Stallions. Like, do better if you're going to cheat. And two, I do think, like, I'll be honest with you, and I have no foreknowledge of anything. It's going to make me sound like I'm implicating somebody. I'll tell you right now, having had discussions with a fair amount of people when I was in Charlotte around major programs, guys skirt these lines all the time. Oh, this is so, and I'm like, I know sign stealing is rampant, but in terms of all that other stuff, all that Spygate, the Belichick stuff, teams, major programs do this. They don't need to, by the way. Here's what's infuriating me. One, I think Ohio State's behind at least part of this story, which I think looks so bad. Like, guys, whether they're cheating or not, whether you're cheating or not, or the definition of cheating, all this crap. Like, to me, this is what a loser school does. This is what Indiana does because you can't beat Michigan. This is what Purdue does. This is what Maryland does. Well, Maryland's okay. Rutgers does. This is not what Ohio State should do.
Well, Greg Schiano, there's that clip of Greg Schiano during the game. He did like his halftime interview, and he had the quote about like, yeah, you know, there's some just awful thing. He didn't say awful, but he was like, there's some shady things going on out there, and it's just really unfortunate, something like that. And now everyone's pointing to that and saying like, oh, he knew what was going on. He knew what was happening. So I guess I agree with you. Like, I'm sure Ohio State maybe had a hand in revealing all this, but I do think it seems like other Big Ten programs are picking up on it. But I do think too, like, yes, it's definitely rampant. It's probably going on in other programs. It is funny. We always talk, Nick, whether it's college football programs or other programs, here locally in Cleveland, we always talk about these different sports teams and franchises, like having these deep thoughts and everything's mapped out a certain way. And they have and sometimes when this type of stuff happens and you see how just bad they were at covering it up, it makes you realize that maybe we give sometimes these programs or these sports teams like way too much credit for trying to like plot these things out. Like we act like they're the smartest people ever, and they have this big old system, and they're going to skirt the rules, and they have this whole master plan when all these things get unveiled. And then it's really like, you know what? Maybe it was just, there was a people who were just being kind of stupid. Maybe it was just a bunch of stupid people doing stupid things, and they didn't really cover their tracks very well at all. So I think we sometimes give them too much credit.
This is another thing that I've learned covering the NFL. And there's like this American ideology, and I think it is mostly American, that if you're a billionaire, you must be smart. Or if you're a millionaire, you must be smarter than the average bear. And I understand why it is that way. Money is the way that we gauge things in this country. But I'm here to tell you, guys, they're just as dumb and fearful as we are. They are. They just don't have to worry about their car payment. Like everybody, we're all on the same level. We have different levels of concerns in whether we're going to get through the week or not. But like, yes, just because somebody is a billionaire, it does not mean they're actually brilliant or a mastermind. Some folks just get lucky. Same thing with millionaires. But I will say, and I want to double back
Elon
on
Musk.
this. Like, yeah, you can say that. I can't. My partner, Dustin Fox, Afternoon Drive, loves Elon Musk. I'm not getting divorced over Elon Musk comments. But I will tell you, man, it bugs me to see Ohio State fans embrace this scandal full-throated and full-hearted. And they're doing it because bleep Michigan. And I get that, but I think at the end of the day, one, let's be honest here, guys, this is in some ways a witch hunt. And I hate having to, it sounds like I'm defending Jim Harbaugh. This could be the Michigan, the Ann Arbor, Sons of Ann Arbor podcast. That's not what I'm doing here. I'm simply saying the NCAA is lashing out at Jim Harbaugh. And that doesn't make, just because it's against Michigan doesn't make it right. And here's the other thing. Sign stealing's not why Ohio State's lost the last 2 years. It's not. Why Ohio State has lost to Michigan the last 2 years. It's not. They've lost because the other team played the better brand of football, because the other team was more physical, because the other team has closed the talent gap. And this year, you're going into a Michigan game where they're the better team. They've got the better quarterback. They've got the better run game because of the guys they have on that offensive line. I think you might have the better defense, but again, we'll find that out in Ann Arbor. So to me, this is a giant distraction for Ohio State. Like, I don't give a damn. Guys, Michigan, the only way Michigan
about the
isn't—
whole state of Michigan?
Yeah, the whole state of Michigan. The only way Michigan isn't winning a title is if you stop them, not if the NCAA stops them.
Yeah.
And it's not going to help your chances against Michigan this year. As a matter of fact, it might only piss them off. And to try and add validity to this because, well, I don't like Michigan is horseshit. And somebody needs to say that. Like, quite frankly, guys, listen, even if this is happening—
we can say that on here because it's a podcast. It's not the radio. That's right.
Well, I don't know that I can say it here, but I am going to say it here because that's approximately what it is. And it just annoys me. It's just a distraction. And if you end up— here's my fear. There's a good chance you're going to play Michigan this year and lose. And if anybody falls back on sign stealing, it's laughable and it's loser mentality. You are Ohio friggin' State. Like, you are the big boy in this conference.
You have a million advantages for sure.
Like, come on. Let's act like the big boys. Let's not act like petty fanboys. This is what it is. And can we play the clip?
One sec, Nick. I did want to say one thing. You're right in that it definitely sounds like sour grapes. And, I think here's the distinction for me, though. If the team is going to sit there and use that as an excuse and let it be a distraction, and if they lose come, end of November, I forget the exact date this year of the game, but if they lose that game and they're looking back and say like, oh, well, we know what they're doing over there and that's why we lost. Yes, 100% losers mentality, sour grapes, all that. They should, to me, this is happening. Ohio State has to do their best to just play this thing down the middle and just say, hey, we're not commenting. We're not worrying about it. We're just taking care of, we got Wisconsin this week. That's what we're focused on. But I will say for the fans, yes, like it feels the same for the fans to say that and use that as an excuse too and be like, oh yeah, vacate the wins. Give us the 2 wins the last 2 years because they've been stealing signs against us and they cheated and all this different stuff. Yes, you're right. But, and if the shoe was on the other foot, we know that Ohio State fans would be saying the exact same thing Michigan fans are saying right now. But that's also the beauty of being a fan is you have the luxury of when it's not happening to your program, you get to look at the other people and judge them harshly and throw all this, mud at them and say, oh, they're not doing it the right way. Take their wins away. I can't fault the fans as much for wanting to sort of to lean into that a little bit because I do think that's part of sports and that's part of what makes it fun being fans is like when the other team's having being investigated by the NCAA, you get to kind of laugh at them. It's just kind of how it goes. It's par for the course.
Can I tell you though, the only thing that bugs me about that is like, again, I'll use the word loser mentality. Like it's weird to watch how high and mighty Ohio State fans, how all of us were when we kicked their ass for 20 years. And now that Michigan's won the last 2 years, and ever since the second half ass kicking by Michigan last year, like it's just been panic. It's just been running around and it's insecurity. And I just hate, like, to me, it's so weird. And this is not an Ohio State problem, just to be clear. This is a Michigan problem. It's a Clemson problem. It's a Florida State problem. It's Miami, Texas, USC, Alabama, Georgia. It's so weird to me when fan bases who are still very much on top, they're 7-0. It's a down year. They're 7-0. And all of a sudden, you get insecure. And it's like, no, you've still kicked their ass for the better parts of 20 years. And the reason why I made the mention of Ohio State, if you're in on this, and if you're helping spearhead this cause, or if you're part of the informant team, yeah, I think you have, like, that to me is a distraction. Nobody on that staff should be thinking anything of the next few games and how you beat Michigan. And tattling on Michigan, I have no interest. Do not care. Because at worst, it's not going to cost them a national championship. It's not going to cost them a spot in the playoffs. At worst, they'll have to either sit Jim Harbaugh, or here's the other thing. I'm not even sure Michigan's going to comply if the NCAA tries to punish them. The NCAA was trying to punish Jim Harbaugh with a 4-game suspension or more. And Jim Harbaugh was like, no, we're good. Well, you know what? I'll take a 3-game suspension against 3 teams I have no concern about. So, good luck. You found the one person who's just not going to pull in with your crap and is not going to, you know what? You're right. I'll sit out the playoffs this year to bow down to the NCAA. Jim Harbaugh is crazy. He is loco in la cabeza. He is not effing around. And he's not letting these jackasses in the NCAA in Indianapolis cost him his chance at what would be the ultimate walk-off moment. The ultimate walk-off moment is winning a national title and then go back to the NFL, likely to the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're right. And I think this actually leads nicely into the clip that we have from one of our shows on 92 Through the Fan here in Cleveland. Ken Carman and Anthony Lima were talking about this exact thing and sort of alluding to what you got to with, what should Michigan essentially get out in front of this and invoke their own punishment on Jim Harbaugh instead of letting the NCAA come in and do the dirty work and do it for them so that they can maybe still be able to set themselves up for that walk-off that you speak of trying to chase a national championship. Let's play this clip for you, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
Jim Harbaugh will claim there's plausible deniability. He absolutely will.
Sure.
I don't understand how, in this situation, this is directly involved in your football games. This isn't Coach K with $5,000 in a Louis to some kid in 2017. This is directly involved to your game plans. You can't tell me there's no way you didn't know. Now, he's going to say it, and I'm going to say, yeah, I don't believe you. If I'm Michigan, I got to think about the future of my program because I think Jim Harbaugh is just going to go to Chicago.
Well, I think he's
just going to go to Chicago or anywhere else.
He tried to leave last year.
So what you do
now?
I think
he was going to leave anyway.
If you're Michigan, I suspend him now.
So you take matters in your own hands.
They already did something as a preemptive strike before, and I'd say, you know what? I have to protect what they've built. They've built something great. And if you're Michigan football, you do not want to go back into hell or where you were before. And I know they had one Sugar Bowl with Brady Hoke, but other than that, it was pure hell for what almost was 20 years until Jim Harbaugh finally got him to the other level. Now people are saying that wasn't even legitimate because of your sign stealing. You've already made a preemptive strike once. I say you do it again. Protect the future of your program because Jim Harbaugh is going to be gone. And he's going to leave with no repercussions because it's the NFL and you're going to be left holding whatever power against the NCAA has against you.
But devil's advocate, Kenny, look at what happened in Kansas. What did Kansas lose with they had mountains of evidence that they were using Adidas to steer players to Lawrence. They had them. They had them red-handed.
But
what happened in the end? Nothing happened.
You're getting players. It's one thing to get players, and you could say, hey, we got big men, and I don't know, we got boosters who really, really love our program, and I can't keep an eye on all of them. They're all adults, and I'm an adult, and I can't sit there and tell adults what to do with their money. And Bill Self can look you dead in the eye and say that and actually mean it and be truthful with it. Coach K could say the same thing. He doesn't know about any of that stuff because he don't want to know about any of that stuff. But when it comes to your game plans, hard for me to believe the head football coach don't know about these things.
Nick, I think it's an interesting question. It's an interesting, I guess, point from Ken on should they just kind of get out in front of it and invoke their own punishment on Jim Harbaugh like they did to start the season. And I see where they're coming from. Here's the thing for me. I don't know. The NCAA, I feel like, is so inconsistent with these punishments. I don't know what's in store. They could just say, hey, it's whatever. Everybody's doing this. We already got you earlier this year, so we're going to let this one go, or this one's not that big of a deal. I don't know off the top of my head, other instances where this type of infraction has happened and what they've done. Or they could be like, hey, 2 times in 1 year, we're coming and knocking on your door. guess what? Now we're definitely throwing the book at you. You're done. You're getting these wins vacated, which is wins vacated thing is like the most useless punishment of all time. Nobody cares. We all saw it happen. They tried to take Reggie Bush's Heisman, and we all went years and years still talking about how, hey, remember that year when Reggie Bush was the best player in college football history and he won the Heisman? Yeah, that was pretty cool. So yeah, like that means nothing to me. But I don't know what my biggest thing is, to Ken's point. I see where he's coming from, because if Michigan even has any inkling that they're going to get the book thrown at them, they probably should get out in front of it. But I still think at the end of all this, like the biggest thing I take away from all this is what it means for Jim Harbaugh's future, which they also alluded to on the clip there. I think he's gone no matter what. And maybe that's why you do get out in front of it, like Ken mentioned, because then you at least set yourself up to sort of be okay on the other side. Because if he's leaving anyway, he's going to leave you with nothing.
Yeah, here's what I'm going to say is it's a very valid fear for Michigan to be left holding the bag with Jim Harbaugh. But here's what the bag that they will be left holding will contain: potentially a national championship trophy. So the idea that a team with the Heisman favorite, with a team that I think absolutely looks like the best Michigan team that they've had, would preemptively suspend Jim Harbaugh in fear of some, I don't know, hammer dropping for the NCAA, which is a feckless organization. They have no balls. They have no balls left. They have no power left. You know why? Because they've been trying to hammer Bill Self to the wall for a decade. I mean, they just have dudes on record, and that's Lima brought this up. Like they've had the bag man be like, "Who paid you?" He did over there, the guy, that Bill Self guy. And here we are. They're still not able to drop the hammer. And that is way more anti-amateur athletics than sign stealing. This is a one-game suspension. And the idea that Michigan boosters should cower in fear of the almighty NCAA. Here's the thing. If let's say they follow this thing down the rabbit hole and there are suspensions meted out, you know when they're likely to be? Next year. And that's if anything happens. So why would you endanger the best year? This is the payoff. This is the payoff for the milk with steak. This is the payoff for the Ward Manual feud. This is a payoff for everything. Go win a national title.
And that's the problem with the NCAA too, Nick, is they're always very reactionary, and they don't like proactively respond to anything. It's always like, oh, well, we'll wait. Like, so if they go out and win a national championship this season, and then they find like, say this goes even deeper, and there was like moles in different teams and all these, like, say they discovered all this like corruptness, right? They'll come out next year and be like, oh, we're vacating the national championship, instead of being like, hey, we should probably try to stop this beforehand. Then it's too late. Because like I said, vacating wins means nothing to me. We saw it happen.
They're also not going to vacate a national title. True. They're not going to do it. Like, this is the hardest that I think anyone's going to get hit. The Connor Stallions.
Because you lose all credibility if you do that. I mean,
no, they don't have credibility in the NCAA.
Well, but they don't. Whatever credibility they have left, like whatever you think of when you hear the NCAA, for a lot of people, like, oh yeah, they govern college sports. Like, you lose all that. There's nothing left for you. You really drain the lake on that if you just do something like that. Like, you can't vacate a national championship.
I don't know that they care. I just don't think they have the power. And I think they are on their last legs. I think this is personal with Harbaugh. And here's the thing. It didn't matter if it was Ohio State or Michigan. The allegations don't really bug me. I kind of laugh at them. And I think it's wasting time if you're an Ohio State fan bugging out over these or casting aspersions, because in the end, you're still going to play Michigan. And as of right now, they're still the better team. I still think Michigan has its best chance to win a national title since Lloyd Carr went away. Retired. So, like, I don't think any of those things are going to change. Michigan's on the warpath to a potential national title. And I think it's a whole distraction. I honestly, like, you're right. You're right about the NCAA and, credibility. They don't care. And this is proving that they don't care. So, we have more to get into on the Sons of the Shoe podcast. We will get into Wisconsin and Ohio State. We will get into something you had to say about Ryan Day. That's next. After word from our sponsors. Sons of the Shoe is back. Nick Wilson, Spencer German, and you have been all over Ryan Day and the word toughness. And you mentioned to me today you really want to get into this on the podcast. He mentioned it yet again. I'm curious how many times Ryan Day has to mention his team is tough before it becomes true.
Yeah, I think we have. You know what? I think we need to start for the show. We need to start a toughness or a physical. It's either physical or it's toughness. We need to start a counter, and we need to do like his post game press conferences, his post game interviews on TV. Maybe one of his weekly press conferences, like his first one of the week or something like that. I don't know. We got to find which platforms we want to use this for. But I think we need to do a counter of the number of times he mentions the word toughness or physical, because I think that he is trying so hard to speak into existence. Listen, as we sort of transition from talking about Michigan, the thing that has been said about Michigan the last 2 years when they beat Ohio State is that they were the more physical team. They are built to beat Ohio State, and Ohio State is built to win in the playoff against these more finesse teams, and that's played out in the field. Michigan bullied Ohio State the last couple of years. And so I think Ryan Day is so in his head with this that he just can't possibly let it go that people are saying his team's not tough. He doesn't build a physical team. He hasn't constructed this roster to be that physical team when things are, out there in the fourth quarter and you got to kind of grind it out and rush your way, use the run game to win a game. They don't think he has that in him with the group that he's assembled, and he is trying so hard to prove everybody wrong and tell everybody he can that we're a tough team. How many times did he say tough team in his rant about Lou Holtz after the Notre Dame game? He just kept saying, we're a tough team, as his voice cracked 13 times. Like, he was so fired up about the fact that people were saying his team wasn't tough, and they continue to say his team wasn't tough, that now he is just in his head. The talking points when he goes out and speaks to anybody publicly is say the team is tough, say the team is physical. At some point, they'll start to believe it. And guess what? Nobody's going to believe it, Nick, until you go between the lines and you play Michigan on the Saturday after Thanksgiving. Nobody's going to believe it until you win that game and you actually out-physical the team that has out-physicaled you. So I'm sorry, I can't do it anymore. I can't sit here and listen to you tell me how tough they are. You got to show me. And that don't mean to be negative after a big win over Penn State. The defense certainly looked physical against them. The defense certainly looks physical, I think, overall. But there's some questions to be desired to be had, and we're not going to get answers to them until they line up across from Michigan.
So I think what you're saying is fair. I would also say that this has been the year of toughness for Ryan Day, and I think I know why. If you think the last 2 years, Ryan Day is not, when people have said you're more of a finesse team or you're maybe not the quintessential Big Ten team, and I've been one of the people who've been saying that. Michigan has been the quintessential Big Ten team the last 2 or 3 years, and Ohio State has been built to beat Georgia, which they damn near did last year. But I think the reason it matters this year to Ryan, more so than it did the last 2 years, is I think he knows that they're going to have to be tough to beat Michigan. And like last year, I don't think they needed to be tough to beat Michigan. They just needed to be flawless in their execution, and they needed to turn that thing into a track meet, and they weren't able to. Same thing 2 years ago, and although that was a closer game. So like this year, I think he looks at it and he's like, well, I can't out-track meet them. I can't. They're as not finesse, but they're as physically talented as we are. And so if we're going to beat them, we've got to stoop to a level of physicality. And so I think his team's lack of physicality is in Ryan's head. I also think he's selling a little bit to the boosters and to the fans of like, hey, no, we're totally physical. Don't listen to what Lou Holt says. Don't listen to what Mark May says. It wasn't great. Don't listen to what anybody else says. And here's the other part. I also think he's selling to his locker room. I think a good deal of your job as a college football head coach is you're selling things. Yeah, it's why Dabo Swinney has existed in this world as long as he can, because he people outside the walls don't believe it. But because he's created such a culture of self-belief that inside those walls, when he says something, yes, a fair amount of the kids do believe it, and a fair amount of the guys that work for him. I think it's just a sales job by Ryan internally in trying to sell it externally.
But Nick, it's one thing I think for the locker room to believe it and for the locker room to buy into this concept that like, hey, we're a tougher team. We've learned from the error of our ways against Michigan in recent years, and we're going to come out and be more physical this year, and things are going to be different and whatever. And they're showing how physical they are through this halfway point of the season. They've obviously out physical a lot of teams. Fine, great. I think the Notre Dame game is a testament to that. The Penn State game is a testament to that. It's one thing for the locker room to believe it and internally feel this thing like, hey, we know things are different this year. It's another thing to keep saying it publicly. Like, to me, Nick, I think the best way to sum this up is if you're a physical team, you don't have to go around telling everybody that you're a physical team. Like, if I think that I'm a good radio show host, I don't have to come in every day and tell you, hey, Nick, just so you know, I'm a really good radio show host. I have to believe it myself, and I can go home and say whatever I want to say behind closed doors in my head or to my wife and my 1-year-old son who gives me an answer that means nothing. I'll say, hey, do you think I'm a good radio host?
That'd be really weird if you were like, hey, 1-year-old, I'm a really good radio host. And then you were like, suck it, and you walked out.
And his response would probably just be, no, that's all he says these days.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, he'd humble me. He'd humble me a little bit. But that's what I mean. Like, it's one thing for me to say it to people internally or believe it myself. It's another thing for me to come into our station every day and sit there and tell everybody that's sitting there, our boss, the people who are on the air, pop my head in, hey, I'm a really good radio show host too. Like, I don't need to tell everybody that if I believe it myself. So, I think he's trying to convince himself even. Like, yeah, we are a physical team, you know?
I think there's a part of that. I also think coaches do this all the time. And here's the thing.
Also, it's funny. I made fun of Ryan Day for his voice cracking, and then my voice just cracked. So, karma.
That's called karma, yeah. So it's funny. Like, I don't disagree with you. The amount that he's saying toughness and the amount that he's mentioning that is almost like chill baby cakes. Like, have some wine, have some grape. Like, it's going to be okay. But at the same point, like, I think he's trying to get the locker room around the idea to embrace almost the underdog. Like, hey, no one believes you're tough, right? Lou Holtz is out here saying what Lou Holtz is going to have. And listen, it worked in the Notre Dame game. Like, you were physical. And I think Ryan Day is trying to turn that into momentum that every guy in that program believes that nobody thinks you're tough. So we'll see. I mean, I think Michigan is the end-all, be-all for that. Like, if you see this team go out and play up head and shoulders above and just a ridiculous level, then I think it works. If you go out there and they dust you, it means this team really was soft and that this team was just beating inferior opponents. But, like, yeah, I think this is an attempt at trying to turn it into a season-long war cry of we're tougher than everybody thinks, and they're doubting your manhood. And honestly, I just think he's doing it because he has to. Like, most years, Ryan Day can just let what happens on the field, whether it's Michigan, Wisconsin, Penn State, I mean, even in the playoffs, he can let what happens on the field speak for itself. He can't this year. He knows he can't. This is arguably his least talented team. And so the fear becomes, hey, I got to find some special advantage, some motivational force, and I think you can do that in college. I don't think if he tried to, I think Ryan Day is a potentially future good NFL head coach because I think he's an offensive-minded guy. He spent a year with Chip Kelly in San Francisco or a year or two in San Francisco, so he has some experience. But, like, if you ever tried this in the NFL, they'd laugh you out of the room, right? But you can do this in college, and it's the one place, and I think this year is the year he has to do it. So while we continue on, I did want to get your take on Ohio State, Wisconsin this weekend. It is a late game, which is going to make my old ass stay up way too late to talk about this game. That's the only part of this game I don't like. Are you fearful this could be a bump in the road for the Buckeyes?
I think for me, it's about time I put some respect on this team. I started the year thinking they could be a 2-loss Ohio State team, which obviously we know is a rarity for that program. And I think that, there's some interesting storylines going into this one, including the fact that it's Wisconsin, tougher place to play. They got the jump around going on, and that you got Luke Fickell there, who's somebody that's been linked to Ohio State numerous times for obvious reasons. Obviously was the interim head coach for a split second there before Urban Meyer stepped in, and the history's there. It's undeniable. And there's questions about, like, oh, if Ryan Day gets fired, would they bring in Luke Fickell? And should they have brought in Luke Fickell by now and fired Ryan Day last year? So I think those questions are never going to go away. So obviously I think there's some pressure on Ohio State to get this win for those reasons, to kind of silence that. And I just think too, like with Luke Fickell teams, they're going to play tough. They're a pretty good defensive team. They generally have played this year a lot of one-score games. They're not getting blown out really by anybody if they are losing. Now, the Iowa game is a little bit concerning and alarming. Somehow they let Iowa do what Iowa does against them, and they only scored 6 points. But, yeah, I mean, like they're playing some close games. I don't think they have – the thing is, like against Ohio State this year, normally I'd sit here and say, yeah, you know what? Ohio State's going to breeze right past them. They got too much firepower. But this is a year where we know that's not the case. And so I do worry a little bit about this game being a little bit closer than maybe we want it to be. But I also think, again, going back to my original point, like this Ohio State team has passed and cleared every hurdle for me. They beat Notre Dame. I thought they were going to lose that game. To me, like they dominated Penn State. Like the score was close for most of it, but they were totally in control of that game just because of their defense. And I think the defense gives you another performance that mirrors that. You can't have what you had against Penn State and then have a letdown against Wisconsin when you know the biggest game left on your schedule is still to come. We're talking about Brian Day throwing out the toughness thing too much. You can't sit here and preach to us about how tough your team is and then not get to Michigan unblemished at this point after you've made it this far in the schedule. So I think they come out. I don't think there's like a lapse in concentration here. I think they're able to handle Wisconsin. It might be like a start slow and pull away type game, but I think that's kind of what I'm thinking with this one.
So I'm a little torn on this game because Wisconsin does not have anywhere near the talent that Penn State does.
No.
So just on that basis, if you beat Penn State 20-12, and by the way, it was a 20-6 game. That was a late touchdown. It didn't really matter in the score. So you pulled away from Penn State the last 5, 6, 7 minutes of that game. So theoretically, you should be able to go on the road in Camp Randall and get an easy dub. Here's the difference, though. To me, the difference isn't talent. The difference is the head coach. And James Franklin is a guy who, in that game, tried to be, I'm going to pass the hell out of the ball. I'm not going to, fall back to our strength, which is running the ball. I'm not going to go ahead and just be patient and let Ohio State make mistakes. They didn't really do that. I'm going to let Kyle McCord make mistakes. They didn't really do that. Luke Fickell will. And you talk about Braylon Allen and Ches Malusi, they're two running backs. And not just that, I mean, the Braden Locke kid, he actually had some really nice moments at the end of the Illinois game. That's Illinois. Like, if you shut down Drew Aller, you should be able to shut down Braden Locke. But the point is, I think Luke Fickell is smart enough to know that our best chance is to run the hell out of the ball, stick to running, turn it into a mud fight.
Yeah.
Because if we do that, then maybe take a couple decent shots off that with Locke late in the game or throughout the game and see if we can get an advantage and then put the pressure on Kyle McCord on the road to win the game. That Ohio State should know this is coming, but like the Fickell factor in this over the Franklin factor, the double Fs, as I call them, absolutely do matter. To me, I think the line is 14.5 points right now. As of right now, the over-under set at 43.5. If Wisconsin's going to have a chance, man, you've got to help hit the under.
Well, I do think you're right about the running situation with Wisconsin. Like, if you're taking anything away from the Penn State game as they watch that tape back, it's that, maybe Ohio State has some wiggle room and some bend in terms of giving up run plays. We saw Penn State sort of get a couple big runs and then they went away from it, like you said, because of that James Franklin factor. I think Braylon Allen and Ches Malusi will have an opportunity to sort of do some damage. And if they stick with that, that's why I think it could maybe be a closer game. But I think the biggest thing is at some point to beat Ohio State, I think Wisconsin's going to need to make a big play.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that they're going to be able to do that because this defense has really cut down on the big plays that they're giving up this year. And I think that ultimately is going to be the difference. Like, I think if you're in a sort of dogfight game like we saw this past weekend with Penn State and Ohio State, I think Ohio State has the edge just because they've already done it now multiple times where they know, like, hey, we're not going to panic. We're going to get through this. We're going to be okay. We're going to come out on the other side. Versus like in other years, you worry if they're playing a team close because you're like, oh, well, they're not really in this situation a lot. So I think that behooves Ohio State and benefits them where they'll just kind of pull away late. And I think Wisconsin, because they do have a big hitter, like they could always if they need to, they can always just throw it to Marvin Harrison Jr. and he can make a big play for you. And I don't know that Wisconsin will have an answer or get you that play to kind of get you over the hump late that you need from an athletic player or a skill player that they just don't have that stacks up to Ohio State.
I think you're fair to wonder whether that can happen. What I would say is Braylon Allen is very capable of making a big play.
True.
Now that's kind of their him or Lucy. One of them's going to have to pop off for it. I would also say though, like this is a game where Michigan's defense really matters, and how good can you really be? Because we always talk about big offensive plays, and yes, those matter. I'd also say, man, one defensive touchdown can swing this game to going from all of a sudden, especially early in the game, to give you a wider margin for error. So whether it's offensively or defensively, there needs some touchdown needs to come somewhere early in this game that puts the pressure on Ohio State. Because I don't think Kyle McCord is ready for this kind of game where it's really all about him. And I know, listen, you beat Penn State. And that was a game where some of that was all on you.
You mean Honda McCord?
Honda McCord. But like Marvin Harrison was able to go ahead and get you where you needed to go. But this is still a test because it's on the road, because Camp Randall is going to be popping. It's a night game. Like this is one of the most raucous environments in the Big Ten. And I think they're going to do it. Here's the thing. I at the same point that I say I'm a little afraid of the fickle factor. Like this is a great moment where if you want to showcase your toughness, you can showcase your toughness by closing this door and beating Wisconsin by halftime. Because they're not, yes, they're 5-2, but they're a team that has significantly more holes on their roster, especially on the offensive side of the ball, than they've had in a long time because of the turnover here and kind of the end of the Paul Chryst era. So there's an opportunity here. If you can out-physical them and you can get some points on the board early, you can really get some momentum, and this could look like a great win for you.
Yeah.
It's just tough. It's tough with Luke Fickell. It's tough with Wisconsin. It's tough on the road. Every one of these experiences is new for Kyle McCord, a.k.a. the Honda McCord.
I will say, though, I think the Notre Dame game, I think, was a true test of, like, your will and your guts if you're Kyle McCord and these other guys. And that's why I think, like, yeah, I'm not saying Camp Randall is a cakewalk in terms of a place to go play, but I do think that if you can survive at Notre Dame the way they did, if you can, and I know it was at home, but if you can beat Penn State in a big game where it's another top 10 team, bright lights, big stage, I think that this team the one thing I will give Kyle McCord credit for, and I will give this offense credit for, is like they are battle tested at this point to weather those storms against teams that kind of hang with them. And we'll see if that, if it finally comes back to bite them, because in some instances it could have. I mean, it was one play that made the difference in the Notre Dame game, but I do at least trust them when you talk about toughness, like Ryan Day continues to. I do think mentally they clearly are a tough team, and they're ready for those moments.
So it's interesting. Like, I think they're battle tested to this point. They've passed every test to this point. I think the test between now and Michigan becomes, don't let a team that you're more talented than sneak up on you. Don't let the circumstances get the best of you.
But Nick, I also think I feel like this team is self-aware enough to understand, though, like this isn't the Ohio State of the last couple of years, where I think you're more prone to let that happen when like, hey, we're going to just absolutely boat race this team. We have Marvin Harrison Jr. and Chris Olave and all, like, in those days, they kind of knew going in, like, we're just flat out better than all these teams. And maybe you take your foot off the gas. I think this team knows that they have to work a little bit harder. Defense has to sort of be the staple of the day in order for them to win. And the offense is going to have to kind of pick things up as they go. But I think they kind of already know that about themselves.
I hope
where they won't let off the gas.
I hope you're right, because if you do, or if maybe get caught peeking to Rutgers, who suddenly looks like a physical matchup. And again, I know it's Rutgers, but any one of these games, like outside of Michigan State, you should roll Michigan State. But like Minnesota's a team that if you let them stick around, 3 of your next 4 matchups can be gotcha games there. So, again, Ohio State traveling to Camp Randall, 7:30 p.m. kickoff, NBC. The line is currently Ohio State, a 14.5-point favorite going into Camp Randall. We'll get more thoughts on that. But Again, Sons of the Shoe podcast. You can follow and subscribe, rate, subscribe, follow, all that stuff everywhere you get your podcast, including 923thefan.com, the free Odyssey app, Spotify, everywhere. And don't forget to watch our beautiful faces on the YouTube channel as well, 923 The Fan. But when we come back, we are assessing the Michigan Panic Meter and 4th and Long. But first, a word from our sponsors. All right, guys, it's that time of the Sons of the Shoe podcast. It's time to assess the Michigan Panic Meter, Spencer. And if you guys missed it last week, or on the post-game show, post the Penn State victory, there are 5 levels. 5 levels to the Michigan Panic Meter. The least level of panic is gray. Then you go to light panic. White is neutral. Light scarlet is your second most panicked. And then finally, the most panicked, scarlet. And I started at light scarlet before the Penn State game. I moved to white. Watching J.J. McCarthy roll the way he did and just look phenomenal, I have to remind myself it's Michigan State. I also am not allowing this.
Talk about distractions. That team's got a lot of them, huh?
Good Lord. And then I'm not allowing the distraction of the Michigan sign stealing scandal to move me. I'm staying neutral. I am not moving. I am neutral right now. My panic is nil. And I think I might actually be nil until I see Michigan continue to kick everybody's ass and you just kind of get along, or if you have a real scare against one of your next 4 games.
I'm going to stay where I'm at, I think, too. Only I'm going to advance the meter slightly more into the light scarlet. We've been talking about this cheating scandal and all this stuff, and you said it earlier in the show, Nick. Like, I could see this being a motivating factor for Michigan more so than anybody. And so, yeah, I think like this just adds fuel to the fire when that game gets schedule of, oh, we got Ohio State coming to town. We've beaten them the last 2 years. And now whether or not they had a role in this or not, like, hey, they're trying to take it from us. They're trying to get us in trouble with the NCAA and you know, whatever. So I just wonder if it serves as an extra motivating factor for them. We already know they were throwing up the 4s in the first game of the season for like free Jim Harbaugh. Like, we know him being missing for a period of time apparently motivated them to really kick the ass of Colorado State or whoever the hell they played. So
I thought that was them bragging about the quality of Michigan women. We got a bunch of 4s. No, actually, you know what?
God.
That was such a low-hanging fruit joke. If you've ever been to Ann Arbor, you realize, much like Ohio State, there are beautiful women everywhere. And so my fat ass is one to talk.
But those are all Michigan women. That's the thing. A lot of them come from other places. That's what you find out about a college campus. It's like, oh.
Yes, that's how colleges work.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like, so I don't know that we can call all the – so if you just go to Michigan and you're an attractive woman, you just automatically become a Michigan woman and you get added to the rating?
So what you're saying is there's a difference between your standard Michigan 7 and a University of Michigan 7.
Yes.
We have to differentiate those two.
Exactly.
You know what? This is why you're the best radio show host in the land, and it's why you tell your 1-year-old son it every chance you get. All right. So that is the Michigan Panic Meter. You guys can send your panic meter, your current status at Nick Wilson says at Spencito _. But let's get to 4th and Long. These are 4 things we're going to try and hit real quick. 1, J.J. McCarthy is quite literally the current Heisman favorite. Caleb Williams took a dookie on the field for the 2nd straight week. Michael Penix, not great, Bob. Now, J.J. McCarthy is plus 250.
Big Penix energy.
Big Penix energy. But J.J. McCarthy plus 250 on the FanDuel app. Michael Penix plus 300. Jaden Daniels of LSU plus 300. And then nobody else is within plus 1,000, I think. Bo Nix is the 4th place guy right now with Jordan Travis at plus 1,200. Are you buying J.J. McCarthy as the real Heisman favorite?
Yeah, I think he has to be at this point. He's obviously putting up some big numbers, some gaudy numbers, and I mean, he's got Michigan rolling. I think it was Penix before or after the Oregon game a week ago, and then I think Washington he didn't play well, but Washington had a little bit of they still won the game, but they had a little bit of a
but it wasn't
game,
pretty,
right, against Arizona State. So I think that sort of took him down a peg. That doesn't mean he can't get back up there. I think he's still, if Washington runs the table, if they win the Pac-12, if they make the college football playoff, I think he's very much still in the conversation. But yeah, I think even though it pains me to say, JJ McCarthy probably gets the nod right now. Granted, hey, what's the streak of guys who have won the Heisman and their team hasn't won a national championship? So maybe it's a good thing for Ohio State if he wins the Heisman.
All right, that's Ohio State fanboy spin, and I will allow it today because we got the fear with all the other Michigan stuff.
Is that spin worse, though, than the, oh, look at them cheating and, take their wins and make Jim Harbaugh go away? There's no way it's worse,
Nothing's worse than that. Nothing is worse than that. So here's the thing. JJ's the FanDuel favorite as the Heisman favorite, and he still has 2 premier games. If he goes to Happy Valley and plays the same way, I mean, he's going to come into the Ohio State game as the odds-on favorite. Like, not just favorite, but maybe runaway favorite. The whole Heisman conversation for JJ specifically could come down to that Ohio State game. So I think he's got 2, he's sitting in a catbird seat is what I'm saying. And if he plays the way he did the first 7 games of the season, the next 4 games or the next 5 games, he is going to seal this thing up. And honestly, he deserves it. He's fantastic. He's the best Michigan quarterback in a very long time.